Her son kicked her out like she meant nothing, not a thank you, not a goodbye. But the hospital records told a story he never imagined. She had saved his life quietly when he was too selfish to care. Welcome back and enjoy the story. The rain hammered against the windows of the modest Chicago home like angry fists demanding entry. Inside, 74-year-old Eleanor Mitchell stood in the hallway she had walked through for 3 years, her weathered hands clutching a battered suitcase with frayed corners and a zipper that hadn't worked properly since 1987. Her son, Michael, towered over her, his face twisted with frustration and something darker. Resentment that had been festering like an untreated wound. "Just leave, Mom. We can't do this anymore." His voice cracked through the house like thunder. Behind him, his wife Jennifer leaned against the doorframe, her arms crossed and her expression cold as winter stone. The wedding ring on her finger caught the dim light, a ring Eleanor had helped pay for when times were tight, though no one remembered that now. Eleanor's arthritic fingers trembled as she adjusted her thin coat, the same navy blue one she'd worn for 6 winters, because new clothes were a luxury she'd never allowed herself. Her back ached from sleeping on their lumpy couch, and her swollen joints screamed with every movement, but she said nothing. At 74, she had learned that some battles weren't worth fighting, not because you couldn't win, but because the cost of victory was too high. "We've done our part," Jennifer added, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "This isn't a nursing home, it's our house." The cruelty in her tone made Eleanor flinch, not from surprise but from the familiar sting of being unwanted in a world that had once revolved around her nurturing presence. Eleanor bent slowly, her spine protesting with each inch, and picked up her suitcase. Inside were her few remaining possessions, a worn Bible, 3 faded photographs, and the last remnants of a dignity that had been chipped away piece by piece. She stepped toward the door without a word, because sometimes silence was the only grace left to offer. The door slammed behind her with the finality of a coffin lid closing. The lock clicked, a sound that would echo in her dreams for weeks to come. She stood on the porch steps, rain soaking through her thin coat, and felt the weight of abandonment settle on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Chicago's streets were unforgiving in the storm. Eleanor's worn shoes held together more by habit than by soul let in every puddle and pothole. Her legs, once strong enough to chase grandchildren and carry heavy laundry baskets, now trembled with each step. The city lights blurred through her rain-soaked glasses, turning the world into an impressionist painting of loneliness. She found herself at Lincoln Park, where a weathered bench sat beneath a flickering streetlight that cast dancing shadows on the wet pavement. This would be her sanctuary now, not by choice, but by circumstance. She lowered herself onto the cold, metal feeling the chill seep through her coat and into her bones. As she sat there, memories flooded back like water through a broken dam. She remembered Michael as a baby, how he used to reach for her with chubby fingers, how his first word had been "Mama." She remembered working 3 jobs to keep him fed and clothed after his father left her hands raw from cleaning offices and her back aching from bending over industrial sinks. Every sacrifice had felt like an investment in love, love that would surely return when he grew up and understood. But Michael had grown up, and understanding had never come. Success had, though. A good job, a nice house, a comfortable life that somehow had no room for the woman who had built the foundation for it all. Eleanor pulled her coat tighter and closed her eyes, trying to remember when exactly she had become invisible to the child she had given everything to save. The night stretched endlessly before her, each minute marked by the steady drip of rain from the tree above and the distant hum of traffic. She dozed fitfully, her body too tired to stay, awake but too cold and uncomfortable to truly rest. Every bone ached, every joint protested, and somewhere deep in her chest, her heart felt like it was slowly breaking into pieces, too small to ever put back together. When morning came pale and grey through the storm clouds, Eleanor was still there. Her coat was soaked through her hair, plastered to her head, and her lips had taken on a bluish tinge that spoke of a body pushed beyond its limits. She coughed, a deep rattling sound that seemed to come from her very soul, and wondered if this was how her story would end alone, on a park bench, forgotten by the world she had spent a lifetime serving. A jogger passed by, earbuds blocking out the world, and didn't even glance her way. A businessman hurried past, phone pressed to his ear, discussing quarterly reports and profit margins, while stepping over the puddle that had formed near Eleanor's feet. The city moved around her like she was a ghost already dead, but still clinging to a world that had moved on without her. But Eleanor Mitchell had a secret, one that would have changed everything if anyone had bothered to ask. One that would transform this story of abandonment into something far more complex and heartbreaking. One that would reveal the true depth of a mother's love and the crushing weight of unrecognized sacrifice. Days blended into each other like watercolors in the rain. Eleanor's cough grew worse, her breathing more labored, her skin paler. She moved. From the park bench to doorways, from doorways to bus stops, always searching for shelter that never quite came. Her suitcase became heavier with each step, though it contained nothing but memories and the few items that proved she had once existed in someone's life. On the third day, as she sat shivering in the alcove of a closed shop, salvation came in the form of a familiar voice. "Eleanor, my dear God, is that you?" The voice belonged to Dorothy Washington, a woman from her old church who had always had kind eyes and a warm smile. Dorothy dropped her shopping bags and rushed to Eleanor's side, her face a mask of shock and concern. "What on earth are you doing out here?" Dorothy asked, her voice cracking with emotion. Without waiting for an answer, she helped Eleanor to her feet, supporting her weight, as they made their way to Dorothy's small apartment 6 blocks away. The warmth hit Eleanor like a physical blow when they stepped inside. Not just the heat from the radiator, but the warmth of human kindness, something she had almost forgotten existed. Dorothy settled Eleanor on her worn but comfortable couch, wrapping her in quilts that smelled of lavender and home. She made tea with hands that shook, slightly hands that understood work and struggle and the weight of caring for others. "Now," she said, gently settling into the chair across from Eleanor, "tell me what happened." Eleanor's voice was barely above a whisper when she finally spoke. "They didn't need me anymore." The words carried the weight of every sleepless night, every unpaid bill she had covered, every sacrifice she had made without recognition. "I became a burden they couldn't carry." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the space to be heard without judgment or advice. She simply sat with Eleanor in the quiet of the afternoon, 2 women who had lived long enough to understand that life's greatest cruelties often came wrapped in the guise of family obligations. What Dorothy didn't know, what no one knew, was that 6 months earlier, Eleanor had made a decision that would have stopped Michael's heart if he had understood its magnitude. When his heart condition had required emergency surgery, when the bills had mounted to astronomical heights, when insurance had fallen short and medical debt threatened to destroy his young family, Eleanor had done what mothers do. She had sacrificed everything to save her child. The revelation came in the form of a simple envelope delivered to Michael's house on a Tuesday afternoon that would change everything. The hospital's billing department had made an error, a clerical mistake that would unravel a web of love and sacrifice that had been hidden in the shadows for months. Michael stared at the corrected billing statement, his hands trembling as he read the name at the bottom, Eleanor Mitchell. Payment in full. His mother, the woman he had thrown out into the rain, the burden he had claimed was too heavy to bear, had quietly emptied her entire life savings to pay for the surgery that had saved his life. $63,000. every penny she had saved from a lifetime of work, cleaning offices until her knees bled, babysitting neighborhood children, for pocket change, living on beans and rice so she could put money away for emergencies. All of it gone in one transaction, given freely and secretly to save the son who had forgotten her worth. Jennifer found him in their kitchen an hour later, still holding the paper, tears streaming down his face. "What's wrong?" she asked, but her voice carried none of the concern a wife should have for her grieving husband. "She paid for it," Michael whispered. "All of it. The surgery, the hospital stay, everything. She gave them every cent she had, and we threw her away like garbage." The weight of his realization hit him like a physical blow. While he had been complaining about supporting his aging mother, she had been selling her few possessions to cover his medical bills. While Jennifer had been calculating the cost of having Eleanor in their home, Eleanor had been calculating how to keep Michael alive, without him ever knowing the source of his salvation. For 3 days, Michael searched the streets of Chicago. He visited every shelter, every soup kitchen, every place where the forgotten and abandoned gathered to find scraps of dignity. His heart pounded with panic each time he failed to find her, each empty bench a reminder of his cruelty, each locked door a reflection of how he had locked his heart against the woman who had given him life twice. He found her on a Thursday morning at Dorothy's apartment, sitting by the window with a cup of tea and a book of poetry. She looked smaller somehow, as if the betrayal had physically diminished her. Her hair was combed, her clothes clean, but there was something broken in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a light that had gone out and might never return. "Mom," he said from the doorway, and the word came out like a prayer. Dorothy excused herself, understanding that some conversations required the sacred space of solitude. Eleanor looked up at him with eyes that held no anger, only exhaustion. "Michael," she said quietly, and even his name sounded different in her voice, distant, careful, as if she was speaking to a stranger she was trying not to offend. "I know what you did," he said, falling to his knees beside her chair. "The hospital, the surgery, everything. Why didn't you tell me?" Eleanor's laugh was soft and broken. "Would it have mattered?" she asked. "Would you have kept me because I had paid your bills, or because you loved me? I didn't want to buy my place in your life, Michael. I wanted to earn it by being your mother." "But you did earn it," he said desperately. "You earned it every day for 35 years. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Please come home. Let me take care of you the way you took care of me." Eleanor stood slowly, her movements deliberate and dignified. She walked to the window and looked out at the city that had witnessed her lowest moments and her greatest sacrifice. "You want me back now because you know I had money to give," she said without turning around. "But when you thought I had nothing left to offer you, threw me away. That tells me everything I need to know about my worth in your eyes." The truth of her words hit Michael like a physical blow. He had loved her when she was useful, when she could babysit and cook and clean and give. But when age had made her frail, when she needed more than she could provide, his love had evaporated like morning mist. "I can't undo what I did, Michael," said his voice breaking. "But I can do better. I can be the son you deserved." Eleanor turned to face him, and for a moment he saw the mother who had rocked him through nightmares and celebrated his smallest victories. But then the moment passed, and the woman who stood before him was someone new, someone who had been forged in the fire of abandonment and emerged with a strength he had never seen before. "I've found my place," she said gently. "And it's not in the house where I have to prove my worth every day. It's here with people who see me as I am, not as what I can give them." Eleanor had decided to move into Sunset Manor, a modest assisted living facility on the south side of Chicago. It wasn't luxurious, The carpets were worn, the wallpaper faded, and the furniture had seen better decades. But it was a place where her dignity remained intact, where the staff called her Miss Eleanor with genuine respect, where her stories were welcomed and her presence valued simply because she existed. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt at peace. She helped in the kitchen when her arthritis allowed, read to residents whose eyes had grown dim, and listened to life stories that spanned wars and depressions and decades of joy and sorrow. She had found her tribe among the forgotten, people who understood that worth wasn't measured in what you could provide, but in the grace with which you lived each day. But Eleanor Mitchell had one more surprise left in her. She called a lawyer, a young woman who specialized in elder law and had kind eyes that reminded Eleanor of her own younger self. Together, they crafted a plan that would ensure her sacrifice would ripple forward through generations. "I want to establish a fund." Eleanor explained, her voice steady, despite the magnitude of what she was proposing. "For families who can't afford medical care for their loved ones, anonymous donations, no strings attached, just help when people need it most." She had more resources than anyone knew, a small pension, social security, and the remnants of savings she had rebuilt through careful living and the generosity of her new community. It wasn't much by worldly standards, but it was enough to plant seeds of hope in soil that had been barren for too long. The Eleanor Mitchell Foundation began small, with quiet donations to hospital billing departments and insurance companies, a child's cancer treatment, an elderly man's heart medication, a young mother's emergency surgery. Each gift was given in Eleanor's name, but the recipients never knew the source. They only knew that someone somewhere had decided their life was worth saving. Word spread through the networks that connect the invisible people of the world. Social workers began to whisper about mysterious payments that appeared just when hope was running out. Hospital chaplains spoke of miracles that came not from heaven, but from the heart of someone who understood suffering and chose to transform it into grace. Eleanor's grandson David had grown up watching his parents treat his grandmother like an inconvenience. At 19, he had been shaped by their example, learning that elderly people were burdens rather than treasures. But when he heard about the foundation, something shifted in his understanding of the woman he had taken for granted. He came to visit her on a Saturday afternoon, bringing flowers from the grocery store and an apology that had been growing in his heart for months. Eleanor was in the community room, teaching a group of residents how to knit scarves for the homeless shelter. Her fingers moved slowly, but surely, creating something beautiful from simple strands of yarn. "Grandma," David said, and the word felt different in his mouth than it had before, heavier with meaning, richer with respect. Eleanor looked up and smiled, the kind of smile that forgives before apologies are even offered. "David's sweetheart, what a wonderful surprise." They talked for hours, really talked perhaps for the first time in David's life. Eleanor told him stories about his father as a boy, about the dreams she had nurtured, and the sacrifices she had made with joy, because love made them feel like privileges rather than losses. David listened with the intensity of someone trying to memorize every word, understanding that he was receiving a gift that could never be replaced. "I want to help," David said finally. "With the foundation, with whatever you're doing. I want to learn how to love the way you do." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "Love isn't something you learn, sweetheart," she said gently. "It's something you choose every single day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." The foundation grew, funded not just by Eleanor's contributions, but by the donations of people who had been touched by her story. David became her unofficial assistant, learning the quiet art of giving without expectation of recognition or reward. Together, they created something beautiful from the ashes of abandonment, a legacy that would outlive them both. On Eleanor's 76th birthday, the residents of Sunset Manor threw her a party in the community room. There was sheet cake from the grocery store and decorations made from construction paper, but the joy was genuine and the love unmistakable. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, surrounded by people who had become her chosen family, and felt richer than she had ever felt in her life. Michael came to the party uninvited, but not unwelcome. He stood in the doorway for a long time, watching his mother laugh with friends who valued her stories and respected her wisdom. When their eyes met across the room, Eleanor nodded. Not an invitation back into her life, but an acknowledgement that forgiveness was possible even when reconciliation wasn't. "She looks happy," Dorothy said, appearing beside Michael in the doorway. "She does," Michael agreed, and the sadness in his voice was mixed with something that might have been relief. His mother had found her place in the world, and while it wasn't beside him, it was somewhere she could flourish rather than merely survive. The Eleanor Mitchell Foundation continued to grow, touching lives in ways both large and small. A teenager received the dental care that allowed her to smile without shame. An elderly man got the hearing aids that reconnected him to conversations with his grandchildren. A young couple facing bankruptcy after their premature baby's extended hospital stay found their bills mysteriously paid by an anonymous benefactor. Each gift was given in Eleanor's name. But more importantly, each gift carried forward her understanding that love was not a finite resource to be hoarded, but an infinite wellspring that grew stronger the more it was shared. The foundation became a living monument, not a statue carved from stone, but a network of human connections strengthened by generosity and grace. David graduated college and chose to work full-time for the foundation, surprising everyone, including himself. His friends thought he was crazy to dedicate his life to charity work when he could have made more money in business or technology. But David had learned something from his grandmother that his generation had largely forgotten, that a life spent in service to others was not a sacrifice, but a privilege. "Why do you do it?" a reporter asked him during an interview about the foundation's 5th anniversary. David thought about the question for a long moment, remembering his grandmother's words about love being a choice rather than a feeling. "Because my grandmother taught me that the most important legacy you can leave isn't money or property," he said finally. "It's the knowledge that you made someone's life better, even if they never know your name. She showed me that real wealth isn't what you accumulate, it's what you give away." Eleanor watched the interview from her room at Sunset Manor now, in her 80th year, and slowing down, but still sharp as a tack. Her hands were too arthritic now to knit scarves for the homeless, but she could still listen to troubles and offer wisdom born from a lifetime of turning pain into purpose. She had never returned to Michael's house, though they spoke occasionally on the phone. Careful conversations that acknowledged their shared history without trying to rewrite it. Jennifer had never apologized, and Eleanor had never expected her to. Some people were capable of growth, and others were content to remain exactly as they were. Eleanor had learned to accept both with equal grace. The true measure of Eleanor's transformation wasn't in the foundation's bank account or the number of lives it had touched, though both numbers were impressive. The true measure was in the peace that had settled over her spirit like a warm blanket on a cold night. She had discovered something that most people spent their entire lives seeking: the knowledge that her existence had mattered, that she had left the world better than she found it, and that love given freely always finds its way back in unexpected forms. As autumn painted Chicago in shades of gold and crimson, Eleanor sat by her window at Sunset Manor and watched the seasons change. She thought about the journey that had brought her from a rain-soaked park bench to this place of dignity and purpose. The path had been painful, marked by betrayal and abandonment, and the kind of heartbreak that changes the very structure of your soul. But it had also been beautiful, lined with unexpected friendships and discoveries about the resilience of the human spirit. She had learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the freedom to live without you, even when that freedom comes at the cost of your own heart. She had learned that worth isn't determined by others' recognition, but by your own actions when no one is watching. Most importantly, she had learned that love given without expectation of return has a power that can transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. The Eleanor Mitchell Foundation would continue long after she was gone, managed by David and a board of directors who understood that true charity begins with seeing others as worthy of dignity and respect. The Foundation's mission statement, written in Eleanor's own careful handwriting, would guide their work to provide help without judgment, love without condition, and hope without limits to those whom the world has forgotten. But perhaps Eleanor's greatest legacy wasn't the Foundation at all. Perhaps it was the quiet revolution she had started in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed her transformation from victim to victor, from discarded to dignified, from broken to beautifully whole. She had shown that it was possible to forgive without forgetting, to love without enabling, and to find peace even in the aftermath of devastating betrayal. Congratulations, type 7 in the comments, so I know you stayed with me until the end. Leave. Like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. See you